Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another weekly market insights. Now, as we jump across to the calendar, quite a quiet economic calendar, quite a light economic calendar, apart from Wednesday, Wednesday afternoon, with inflation out of China, which came in hotter than expected. We have seen some increasing positivity around the numbers in China, but the COVID situation in that country is likely to cause a bit of a slowdown in those numbers. So I'm not going to read too much into the inflation rate out of China, but the CPI out of the US at 130 was the main focus of attention this week. Now, we came in lower than the previous month. You can see here the core inflation rate, core CPI 6.2%. Previous was for 6.5. The CPI in terms of the year-over-year figure, the full figure with everything included, was 8.3%. Came in at 8.5% last month. Now that is a decrease from last month, so it does play into the narrative of inflation peaking, inflation topping out, but consensus was for it to pull back a little bit more. We can see 6% for the core rate, 8.1% was expected for the full metric of inflation. So a little bit caught in two minds on that one. A little bit higher than anticipated, but lower than last month. So there's still that kind of narrative of inflation potentially topping out, but maybe not quite as much as markets had anticipated. So what that has done is that has resulted in this trend continuing. The US dollar has continued its uptrend. The S&P 500 has continued its downtrend, and that has not changed coming into this week. Now, I still stick by the fact of the US dollar being slightly overbought, but my opinions and my biases are somewhat irrelevant when this continues to truck on higher. Now, in terms of long term, I don't think I want to buy this long term. I do think we will get a pullback at some point, but the short term trend is still higher, so we continue to look to be a buyer. We are still at that big monthly level that I've been talking about. We've not closed above that. We're nowhere near the end of the month just yet, so we still have a bit of time for the US dollar to pull back. But one thing that I would look at in terms of that dollar move higher is that dollar move higher has been met with a move higher, as you can see here across the 10-year yield, and also, if I just get it up, then across the 2-year yield as well. Now you can see the trend across 2-year yield, which is more of more of an indication for short-term interest rate changes, and then the US 10-year yield is more revolves around growth and inflation expectations. Both of these have been moving higher, yields across the board moving higher, and had obviously backed a dollar move higher. But interestingly, what we have seen over the course of this week in terms of the yields across the 2-year and the 10-year, same situation, is a bit of a pullback. If I throw this onto the weekly time frame and just have a quick zoom in, what we can see is we were just this morning printing a bearish engulfing. We've since pulled back slightly, and we're kind of equal lows now at the minute of the two candlesticks between last week and this week. It will be interesting to see how we close later on into this evening. If we do get a bearish engulfing, that is likely to result in a slight pullback in yields potentially. And we can also look to the 2-year again onto this weekly time frame with a nice long-legged doji printed last week, followed up by a bearish engulfing potentially at the end of this week. So definitely some hesitation last week in terms of the 2-year, some confirmation of a turnaround potentially in the 2-year, and then hopefully we can get whatever we get, if we can get a bearish engulfing across the 10-year as well, that would make for some potential downside in the dollar heading into next week. But as long as the US dollar, the dollar index, euro dollar, continues to truck higher, continues to make higher highs and higher lows, it would be advisable to stay on that side of the market, continue to buy dollars with in mind that it's probably not wise to go for a long-term hold. Other bits of news out over the course of this week is the cryptocurrencies. The massacre across cryptocurrencies that has really been going on for the majority of this year has intensified over the course of this week. Now, what happened, one of the things that happened was a couple of the stable coins designed to link or track the price of the currency that it is tracking. Obviously, in this case, the dollar. We can go Terra against US dollar, and that essentially tracks the price of the US dollar one for one, in order to be able to kind of transact cash within the cryptocurrency markets. You can see here the peg quite clearly at 1 has been pretty stable, pretty stable the whole time. We don't have a great deal of data along this chart, but we have since moved lower over the course of this week. That peg is broken. Markets are still a bit undecided, as to the implications kind of in the medium term, short term, medium and long term, in relation to what's going on in the break below 1. Markets are a little bit undecided or very undecided. I was trying to make sense of it myself, what could happen going forward, but that is, the markets are still undecided, trying to figure it out, and still trying to process that information. What that has resulted in is a steepening or an increasing of the sell-off that we've seen over the course of the week, but over the course of this year in terms of cryptocurrencies, mainly in the form of Luna. We can see here now the bearishness was setting up on Luna before this even happened. We can see I'm going to change the colour to that as well, but you can see there, a bit of a left shoulder, bit of a head, bit of a right shoulder. It's the world's best head and shoulders if that's what caused the sell-off. But we've then since moved back lower, and we're below a cent, below 0.1 of a cent. So we are, obviously extremely bearish. We're down at lows. The sort of thing is untradeable at the moment. I mean, that has made its way all the way down to zero. Now, what that means for the coin and the team, the project behind it going forward, remains to be seen. Does it get delisted? Does it get taken away? Or do people decide to get back into it once this whole situation settles down? Now, it's kind of important then to recognize that it's a good thing to not have all your eggs in one basket, especially in these cryptocurrency markets when they are inherently risky. And also you got to think of then the sort of value of these things in the real world. I mean, this thing's selling off. It's been selling off. But normally, like if something sells off, an asset, say there's a currency or a stock index, an asset that's been around and has stood the test of time, they will always have somebody willing to buy them or wanting to buy them. If a currency sells off heavily, there'll be somebody that wants to buy a bunch of the currency to get a cheap deal. If a stock index sells off heavily, there'll be somebody willing to buy it at some point, trying to get a cheap deal. But in terms of the cryptocurrencies, it's actually got they're still relatively new. I mean, they're still, Bitcoin's is it 13 years, or I can't remember the exact figure of when it was created, but in terms of Bitcoin, Bitcoin has a use in the world. Bitcoin can be used for transactions in different countries and stuff. It's beginning to be kind of more and more widespread, even though that has sold off over the course of this year. But something like Luna does not have a great intrinsic value. It's quite worthless out in everyday life. So, if that's selling off, then if there's no reason for people to need it, if people don't need it and it's selling off heavily, there's nobody to take a buy order. There's nobody to take a buy position and to get it back into this market and push it back higher again. So it's just a bunch of sellers being met with no resistance by the buyers. Prices continue to move lower and we're down at zero, and nobody has seemed wanting to buy it back. So having been up at 70, 80 at the beginning of the week, now down at zero, it's lost nearly 100% of its value, and that's why it's wise to not keep all your eggs in one basket when it comes to the cryptocurrencies. You're better off spreading your money around these things so that if something like this does happen, you do not lose too much cash at the end of it. Looking forward to next week. A pretty busy week in terms of the UK calendar. We've got labour market figures at 7 a.m. on Tuesday. We have got inflation 7 a.m. on Wednesday. The two main figures that the Bank of England will look at. We've also then got consumer confidence on Friday and also retail sales on Friday. So a pretty busy week in terms of the economic calendar surrounding the UK. With the Bank of England at their last meeting hiking rates for the fourth consecutive time, unsure on the monetary policy outlook going forward in terms of tightening. They're expecting a contraction of GDP in Q4 of this year, and they are expecting inflation to peak in Q4 of this year. So it will be interesting to see how these numbers play out. The kind of topping out of inflation we've seen across a couple of other developed nations, mainly in the US and Europe. If we do get a similar sort of thing in terms of the UK, that will be interesting. But we do have a forecast of 8.9%, and the central bank themselves do think that inflation is still going to continue to rise. So these data points over the coming week will definitely be something the Bank of England thinks going forward into the next meeting, and could help us decide, could help us formulate some trade ideas heading into that. But you have to wait till the numbers come out, how markets react to it, and then we can cross that bridge when it comes to it. Apart from that, not got a great deal else to cover. Have a good weekend. get some rest, relaxation into you, ready for another week of trading next week. And I'll be back next week, next Friday, same time, with another weekly market insights. Thank you.